Alrighty, well, now we come to the first of the final chapter of the Harry Potter saga, titled Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. It is based on roughly the first half of the final book of the same name, and it is probably the worst Harry Potter film of the series. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to call it bad. I'm just saying that it is it is the least good of the series. At best, I would say that it's okay. At worst, I would say that it's honestly kind of dull. So, so basically, what the story this time around is that everything is just coming to a head. Um, Voldemort has gathered the appropriate amount of followers to initiate his takeover of the Wizarding World. And Harry, Ron, and Hermione are skipping out on their last year at Hogwarts to go in search of the Horcruxes. And for those who are uninitiated in the Harry Potter lore, Horcruxes are these devices that Voldemort tapped into. They're these magical objects that can be anything, but using dark magic, Voldemort transported some of his soul into a certain number of objects. And as long as these objects remain intact, then Voldemort can never really truly die. Part of his soul was in his diary, hence the plot of Chamber of Secrets. Part of his soul was in a ring that Dumbledore had when he was still alive, hence why his hand was all gnarled. Now, this begs the question, why was he wearing the ring in the first place? I don't know. So, what's wrong with this movie? Well, not the acting. The acting is still pretty good. Basically, all across the board, the trio is still very good. And they do a good job of carrying this movie. The supporting players are also very good. Brendan Gleeson is good. Let's see, David Thewlis is good. Bill Nye is actually a newcomer, and for what little screen time he gets, he leaves an impact. I like the fact that they cast Bill Nye as the new minister. Don't really know what's up with the hair, but okay. I shouldn't really be one to talk, considering how goofy my hair has gotten in the various years where I've grown it long. But I digress. the acting is still very, very good. And that's really one thing that I think that this series has always benefited from. Aside from the writing, the acting has just been consistently good and has actually gotten consistently better. But, and here's where the problem lies. This book did not need to be 2 movies. It just didn't. It could have sufficed as a 3-hour movie, like The Lord of the Rings. Because at this point, there doesn't really need to be any world building, or at least not nearly as much as there had to be in the first few. They're not really breaking any new ground in terms of the setting. They're not really breaking any new ground in terms of introducing new characters. It's still the same basic cast, with just a few new players. So there's nothing really new there that necessitated 2 films. Their justification for making it 2 movies was that the plot was just so expansive and so complex that they needed 2 movies to get it across. I will admit that the plot for Deathly Hallows is it's definitely longer and more encompassing, and occasionally overly complicated, but I still do not believe that you needed 2 movies, especially considering the problems with this movie. Now, this movie, it just gets so boring at times, and there are a few reasons why. Um, the there is an inconsistent pace when it comes to this movie, because at the start of the movie the pace is very fast, and it does a good job of setting up this very suspenseful conflict. I mean, it basically opens the movie with a chase. So I was like, okay, we're really hitting the ground running here. And then basically after that it just slowly grinds, it slowly ramps downward and loses momentum until around the midway point there is a long stretch of just nothing happening. They're not even conveying any kind of plot. There's just, and if they are conveying a plot, they're just taking baby steps. It's just this long stretch of nothing happening, and the pace just stops. I mean, right around the time when they meet Bathilda Bagshot is when the pace just stops. It just grinds to a halt. And it was at that point that I really started going, come on, pick it up. And sure enough, in the last third of the movie, they do pick up the pace a bit, but it never quite reaches it never quite regains that momentum that it sets in the first act. All right, so back to the mid part, the midway part. I'm not even kidding you. There are long stretches of the characters just kind of sitting around and just kind of contemplating what they have to do. And I understand that it's meant to build character development, and I understand that it's meant to be atmospheric. I understand what it's trying to do, but they overdo it. And I think one of the reasons they overdo it is because this was split into 2 movies. This did not need to be 2 movies. They're trying to fill up the running time and make this 2.5 hours when it doesn't really need to be. I could have trimmed a half hour at least out of this movie, and you really wouldn't have lost much. And then there are the little plot threads that really just kind of go nowhere. Well, I don't want to say go nowhere, but the plot never really comes to a forefront. It's mostly just... The plot never really seems to be at the forefront here. It's mostly just these characters' interactions. And ordinarily that wouldn't be a problem, but after spending 6 movies with these characters, we basically know what they're about, we basically know what their personalities are, and we basically know what they have to do. So, really, there's not much in the way of new information being conveyed to us with these moments the characters have with each other. So it's basically, you have this long stretch of the film just kind of spinning its wheels, retreading familiar territory, and when it's not doing that, they're trying to advance the plot by destroying the Horcruxes, but they're not getting anywhere. Their progress is slow, if any progress is being made at all. And as a result, when I walked out of the theater after watching this for the first time, I was like, that kind of sucked. And I don't harbor that same opinion now. I don't think it sucks, but it is definitely the worst of the bunch when it comes to the Harry Potter movies. And like, again, while it's not bad, at best I can say it's okay. It's okay, considering how bad it could have been. If you want to look at this type of movie, at this type of Part 1 movie done completely and utterly wrong, without a single semblance of any kind of narrative justification, watch Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1, because so little happens in that movie. Story-wise, character-wise, just nothing happens. I mentioned that already in my review of the thing. But But this, I can safely say that this is a lot better than Breaking Dawn Part 1 because, like I said, the story is there. This actually has a story. This actually has conflict. This actually has a plot that starts within the first 10 minutes. This actually has acting. You like these characters. You still like these characters, but again, the problem is just the pacing. The pacing just slows, just completely comes to a halt. And once it reaches that point, it never really gets back up again. But again, with that said, the action scenes are very well shot. The acting is still very good, and for the most part, the characters never really feel intrusive. I never really felt like, okay, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Only a few times when it came to Dumbledore's followers, because occasionally the characters say like, oh, this is so and so. He's a bad guy, and I'm like, okay, I'll take your word for it. I don't really know who he is, and if he did show up in the other movies, he barely qualified as an extra. But yeah, I don't really know how much more I can say about this movie. I will say this. I still don't like Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort, at least in the David Yates movies. I just think he's a little too dainty and a little too, I hate to use the word, but a little too feminine at times. I just didn't find him all that menacing. At best, I found him mildly creepy, mildly weird. Because we're constantly told how oh, he's evil, he's the most powerful wizard, he's the most powerful dark wizard alive, and when you see him act out these scenes with just these very dainty mannerisms and with these long fingernails and no nose, I'm like, really? Because he just seems a little goofy. He just seems a little odd to me. It doesn't really seem intimidating so much as just odd. Much better in Goblet of Fire. At least in Goblet of Fire, he was mildly intimidating. But, again, I still don't like Bellatrix Lestrange. I was never really a huge fan of her character, I admit that, but the way Helena Bonham Carter plays her, if Ralph Fiennes is a little over the top, then Helena Bonham Carter she chews so much scenery in this movie. She chews the scenery, spits it back out, and then chews it again, and then spits it out again, and then steps on it and dances on its remains. You think I'm exaggerating? No, she is just not the least bit menacing, and at worst, she's a little annoying. I really got kind of tired of her screaming fits. I really got tired of her screaming like a lunatic. And I know she's supposed to be a lunatic, but I think they just take it way too far and push it well beyond the realm of credibility. I just don't think any person would act this way. And I understand she's supposed to be this crazy prison convict who's really turned on by Voldemort. They get that across okay. And in the council scene, when Voldemort is meeting with all his followers, she's not that bad. But when she gets unleashed on her enemies, she just goes full throttle, and I just don't think it works for her. I just think Helena Bonham Carter is just too weird. She's too weird and not scary enough. She's just not scary. I didn't find her scary. I didn't find her enjoyable. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just in a minority on that, because I do know people who really who really do find her frightening in these movies, more power to you. It just didn't work for me. But yeah, I didn't think she was very good in this movie. But with that said, what also kind of demoralized me as I was watching this movie is the color palettes. And this is kind of what I was getting at when I say that the David Yates Harry Potter movies all kind of blend into one, stylistically. Because from Order of the Phoenix onwards, they just get darker and darker, and the colors get more and more muted, and it's not very pleasing to the eye. I just got so depressed. Well, maybe that's too strong a word. I just felt like in the scenes we were supposed to, whenever there was supposed to be a happy scene, I couldn't really get swept up in it because of the muted color palette. This is a very dark movie in how it was filmed and how they handle the lighting. Basically every frame is just the colors. The vibrant colors are dead and gone. I understand that's kind of going with the general theme of despotism and death, but I think for something with raised stakes like this and with this much on the line, I would think that the film would try to inject a little more life and a little more energy into itself than just kind of making viewers feel demoralized by the color scheme that they chose to go with. But what else? I had one other thing that I wanted to mention. Oh, this is also a point that I made in one of my earlier videos that I think really comes into real significance here. I think J.K. Rowling is ripping off J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm sorry. I think she is. And I think at this point she was kind of running out of ideas. And I mean no disrespect to her as a writer. She's a very talented writer. I just was drawing all these connections to Lord of the Rings that before I was just kind of passing off as coincidences. But no, here I'm convinced that if she didn't blatantly rip J.R.R. Tolkien off, she took very strong inspiration from him. And I understand J.R.R. Tolkien's works have become basically the equivalent of the Bible for fantasy readers and heroic literature. But that still doesn't change the fact that the imagery in this movie strongly evokes imagery from the Lord of the Rings movies, like the Dementors. The Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban and Order of the Phoenix and this movie look and sound like the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths from Lord of the Rings. Even their descriptions are vaguely similar. Let's see, what else? You have these friends going on this quest to destroy this magical object, and destroying said magical object, or objects in this case, will help in subsequently destroying the most evil, despotic being alive. Sound familiar? If not, then I will even go one step further. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione they have the locket Horcrux. Whenever they wear this locket, and this is actually where I actually noticed this is a bit of a plot hole. This may have been further explained in the books, but again, I haven't read them in a while, so I wouldn't really remember. But at one point they're walking around the forest with this locket, and whoever wears the locket, they're slowly corrupted and overcome with this very bad attitude, this very hostile demeanor, and it basically changes their personality, and they basically get angry at whoever. They basically get angry at the drop of a hat. Sound familiar? When Harry had to take off the Horcrux, I half expected him to say, "Wow, precious." This just seems rather blatant. I'm not accusing this movie of plagiarism. I'm not accusing J.K. Rowling of plagiarism. I'm just saying that maybe they're being a little too obvious with the imagery here. Speaking of imagery, there are wizard Nazis in this movie, and this one I actually thought was kind of justified. This type of imagery because Voldemort is basically the wizarding equivalent of Adolf Hitler, because he does not think Muggle-born wizards are worthy of interacting with pure-blood wizards or even half-blood wizards. He thinks Muggle-borns or mudbloods are just the lowest form of existence in the wizarding world, and he just wants to stamp them out. So when he takes over the Ministry, not only does he erect a statue in the middle of the atrium, which shows wizards standing on a platform on top of this mass grave, it looks like, of all these mudbloods, like a visual representation of wizards literally standing over mudbloods, and mudbloods being under the boot of wizards. So not only does he erect that visual representation of his policy, but also he employs these guys called Snatchers, which are basically the Harry Potter equivalent of Gestapo agents. And these Snatchers are led by this one wizard, this one evil wizard. I forget his name, but he's played by Nick Moran from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and I just found that kind of weird how Nick Moran is playing this type of bad guy, this type of Nazi-esque bad guy, but he seems to be playing it like Ronald Lacey from Raiders of the Lost Ark. The crazy hissing Gestapo guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark, who he was basically the guy dressed in black. He was the evil German guy dressed in black who Indy defeated in Nepal when he attacked Marion in her bar. That's who I'm talking about. Nick Moran's performance in this movie is strongly reminiscent of Ronald Lacey's performance in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and part of me feels that was no coincidence, given the type of imagery that they are evoking in this movie, and the type of character that Ronald Lacey was playing. I'm guessing that was no mistake. How Nick Moran wanted to I don't want to say impersonate, but pay homage to Ronald Lacey's performance, because that was an effective performance. In conclusion, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 is not a bad movie, and considering how slow it could have been, I'm actually surprised at how relatively brisk it moves along. This could have been the most boring movie ever, and it was boring at times, and I'm in no mood to watch it again anytime soon. But considering the artistic bankruptcy of splitting this into two movies, this is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It was okay. And in comparison again, I sound like a broken record here. Compared to how bad it could have been, having it just be okay is not such a bad thing.